All right, well, let's get going. Thanks, everybody. I was a little scared about the attendance there, but there was a lot of people coming in, so great. So we're going to get started. I'm Andrew McAllister, one of the commissioners here at the California Energy Commission, just on the next floor up, and really happy to be celebrating the EPIC program generally. And just the day has so much content. You already all availed yourself of a half day of it, and here we have um, the sort of afternoon hitting our stride here to finish out the day with a few interesting topics. In particular, improving performance in large buildings. You know, we kind of intuitively think a lot about single family and that, you know, the sort of population of California and smaller, you know, garden apartments, which there are a lot of. And I think sometimes we underemphasize the larger buildings. And this is both large multifamily and which is largely renters across the state, not entirely obviously, but a large percentage of renters, a fair percentage of low income. You know, more low income renters live in multifamily housing than single family, and also commercial buildings, you know, larger commercial buildings. And so, you know, just to read the description, you know, large existing buildings present a major opportunity for meeting our climate and energy goals, but they are relatively complex. They can be relatively complex. So emerging technologies, we all want to see more heat pumps, and heat pumps are sort of getting bigger and better and filling that market more. They allow us to electrify heating and cooling, at least in part and often fully, without major structural modifications. So we're going to hear a lot about sort of some scenarios there and the good work that's happened that our panelists can tell us about. We also have the refrigerant challenge. So we need low GWP refrigerants. And so we're asking a lot of the industry to both develop new technologies that have the right form factor and that are efficient and that are heat pumps, and you know, figure out how to downsize those so they fit in the footprints in a large building, you know, the existing footprints in large existing buildings, which isn't always straightforward. If the buildings weren't built for those technologies in the first place, you know, it's hard. A big heat pump replacing, you know, a smallish boiler. And so at the same time, you know, new technology at the same time adapting and adopting the low GWP refrigerants. And so that's also a fair amount of design work and change in manufacturing and the like. So there are some drop-in approaches. I think there's some risk with some of those, and you know, we need more experience, and we have a lot of experience here on the panel that we can talk about, you know, when that can be a good option. And yeah, so the panel, of course, will showcase the latest EPIC funded innovations, advancing cost-effective emissions reduction solutions in this sector. Let's see. So we have three amazing speakers here. Paul Rafferty, who is a researcher at the Center for the Built Environment, UC Berkeley. Great shop. If you all don't know the CBE's work, they've been at this for a really long time, thoughtful, smart, very collaborative, and really plugged into the ecosystems in this space, in the built environment, and also with very strong links up with Berkeley Lab. Jane, you know, I should have checked. Melia. Okay. Hardy. Jane Melia, who is the co-founder and CRO of Harvest Thermal, which is a great new company who's doing amazing things with hybrid systems, which she will tell you about. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. But systems that use heat pumps for both water heating and space heating and cooling in one package. So there's probably more to it than that. I'll let her tell you about it. And then finally, Doug Black, who's the grid integration group leader at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, where I sat up on third and fourth floor, building 90 for a while there back in the day. It's been almost 35 years since I started there, and I worked there for a few years. Just I'd say, nations and global leader in really developing energy efficiency technology classes, and also advising on deployment, and just a raft of other value that they bring as the national lab. I know that when I worked there, it was amazingly powerful just to like have a cubicle on the fourth floor, building 90, and just be able to call anybody that I wanted or needed to call, and they pick up the phone and say, "Oh my gosh, Berkeley Lab!" And you know, here I'm a 22-year-old graduate student. It was a great sense of power. when talking with housing authorities about energy efficiency, right? So, but it was a huge learning experience for me too, and just enabling of young aspiring researchers and engineers and just professionals is an incredible patrimony that we have here in the state. And just really grateful for that. And we are going to do all we can to keep that that muscle fit and funded to the extent we can in these hard times. So I want to give each panelist the time to introduce themselves, their topic, and run through a few slides, and then we'll circle back with some questions. So, Paul, you want to go first? And thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction and for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. And frankly, for funding the research that we do at the Center for the Built Environment and allowing us to do this work and present it to you today. Hopefully, all recovered from lunch and are now wide awake and ready to learn about large building decarb. So I'm going to highlight two projects here that were CEC funded. My name, as the commissioner just mentioned, is Paul Raftery, and I work at the Center for the Built Environment, where we do research into public interest on all types of technologies in buildings and occupant satisfaction in buildings. So if you're ever interested in that topic, feel free to come out and chat with us. So the first of these two projects I'm going to talk about is really about large building decarbonization. Both of these topics cover that. But this one is focused on how we can, as cost effectively as possible, get substantial emissions reductions in existing large buildings. This was a CEC project that finished up last year, where we were leading with energy efficiency measures rather than a fuel switching approach. We were able to, through controls retrofits and equipment replacement, we were able to reduce the natural gas consumption in 2 large office buildings by 70% annually. The combined utility cost savings, and yes, there were cost savings at the utility every year, were $110,000 a year, or about 50 cents a square foot. There's tons more information about that project and lots of other outcomes from that project at this QR code here. I'll bring you to our webpage, and all of those are publicly available resources. And on this graph here, what you're seeing is the total emissions associated with space heating in those buildings, in one of those building types. And that's just in tons of CO2 per year. The gray bar is the pre-retrofit building. That was just all natural gas. And moving from the gray bar to the post-retrofit, which is the red bar, all we did was replace boilers with boilers and in-depth controls efficiency measures. So we got a 70% reduction in annual natural gas by just those two measures. We also modeled how much additional savings we would get by switching to heat pumps. And you can see the effects of a partial electrification, which is using a very small air-to-water heat pump that's about 20% the size of peak capacity. And then the gold bar is a fully electric solution. On the left is today's grid, and on the right is the 2045 goals of a zero emissions grid. So a couple of things to highlight here. One is we got enormous cost-effective savings, cost-effective emissions reductions from just efficiency measures alone. And you get almost the same benefit of full electrification by partial electrification, even out to 2045. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later during the presentation. That can be a feasible pathway to achieve these in large buildings that really have a lot of constraints in a kind of gradual approach to decarbonization. And then, next slide. And then the current project that we're working on, again, CEC funded. This one is a part of the EPIC program. And here what we're doing is demonstrating new heat recovery equipment in, again, existing large commercial buildings. And these types of heat pumps are using ultra-low global warming potential refrigerants that really, even if they're released in the atmosphere, have such a low GWP that it's negligible. We're demonstrating this in an existing large hospital in San Francisco. And the idea here is to capture all of the heat recovery potential, both from existing heating and cooling loads in the building, but also from exhaust air sources in the existing hospital. And here we estimate that just by that mechanism, we can reduce emissions from heating by about 50 to 80%, depending on the building. It won't fully get us all the way to 100% electric, but in existing buildings where you're hugely constrained on space in existing plant rooms or space on rooftops or electrical capacity, that can get you a huge portion of the way there cost effectively and more immediately than what might be a more in-depth gut renovation, for example. So I'll be talking about some of that later today, and thank you for your time. And I'll pass it off to Jane here.
Slight change in program. I'm not Jane. So I'm Doug. Great to be here. Thanks for the great introduction. I thought I went back a long way at the lab, but Andrew definitely tops me by about, and I've been there about 25 years. I work what's called the energy technologies area. This is a division that is focused on new innovations, particularly around how energy is used in buildings, transportation, industry, developing new batteries, improving an aging electric grid, innovative distributed energy resource integration. And we've been doing this, or the division has been doing it for about 50 years. And we have a long history with CEC and CEC projects and funding, even going back to when it was PEER before. We've had the Demand Response Research Center. We now have currently Cal Flex Hub. And many demonstration projects, a long history, and really appreciate the California Energy Commission. I'm particularly excited about this. We have two projects with this same team, and it's one of the best teams I've worked with on an epic project or any real demonstration and development project, because each of the team members is great at what they do, and we don't overlap that much. Everybody has their specialty that is that they do very well. We've got our lead, our prime is Prospect Silicon Valley, who's great at project management, project conception, bringing partners together, finding field sites, and most importantly, making sure the results of the research are actually useful and get out into the real world. So sort of the tech transfer part and sharing those results and communicating those to relevant regulators, industry, professional organizations. So in particular, this project, and as well, I'm sorry, Flow Environmental Systems, who has developed a great heat pump, air to water heat pump technology using CO2 as a refrigerant. So we've an advanced heat pump with great environmental qualities and great efficiency performance. So we are using one of our resources at Berkeley Lab called Flex Lab, which is a highly instrumented, highly controllable commercial office building simulation facility where we were able to drop in the Flow's heat pump and use that as the chilled and hot water, replacing the chilled and hot water system in our Flex Lab system. And with fan coil units in 3 different kinds of zones, where you have a window zone that has higher heat load in the summer, higher cooling load in the summer, and then interior zones. And we have these devices that mimic occupants with real body temperature and moisture. And the one thing we had to add to this one that we didn't have was we didn't have anything to consume domestic hot water, because one of the great things about the Flow technology is it provides simultaneous heating, cooling, and domestic hot water. So we came up with this very complex looking rig to consume hot water as it would be used in a commercial building. We're also, in addition to commercial office buildings, looking at, we will be demonstrating this, installing this at a dairy food processing facility for their freezer and refrigeration, which is a really exciting new application that this hasn't been done before. All right, thanks. Now I'll hand it over to Jane.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jane Melia. I'm the co-founder and Chief Revenue Officer at Harvest. And it's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you for including me on the panel, and also to the CEC for all the support for Harvest through the EPIC grants throughout our development and commercialization. If you could bring up my slide, thank you very much. So what does Harvest do? We help buildings transition from gas heating and hot water to clean electric alternatives by combining heat pumps with thermal energy storage. Let's take a look at the problem that we're addressing. First of all, heating and hot water represent a surprisingly large proportion of energy use in homes, about 2/3. And that's nearly all from burning gas in our furnaces, water heaters, and boilers. And the good news is that we're beginning to transition away from that, and we need to transition to clean electric alternatives. Heat pumps are the answer, but there are a couple of challenges. What about the impact on bills? Also, what about the impact on the grid for adding this new load? And Harvest, by combining heat pumps with thermal energy storage, allows us to address that problem. So let's take a look at the chart in the middle. It's a day in the life of a grid between midnight and midnight. And what you can see on the gray line is high emissions and also generating costs in the morning and the evening. Lots of lovely, clean, cheap solar in the middle of the day. When does a regular heat pump need to operate to heat your home? Well, you need heating in the morning and the evening. So that's when it's going to operate on the red line, adding a load to the grid and driving the need for costly capacity upgrades. I can hear an echo. Is the audio okay for people? Okay, great. So the red line is a conventional heat pump. They're great. We love heat pumps, but it is adding this challenge to the grid. Harvest. Thank you. Okay. So Harvest, by combining a heat pump with thermal energy storage, we can completely decouple when the heat pump operates from when we deliver the heating and hot water. So we can run the heat pump on the green line when it's warmest and most efficient, when electricity is cleanest and cheapest to generate, also when you can take advantage of time of use rates. And yet we deliver all your heating and hot water whenever you need. So the EPIC grant that we've been doing with the support of the CEC has allowed us to develop and start to commercialize this product. We now have our product contract manufactured in Fremont, California, and deployed in a number of homes. And what we're seeing is our homes are saving about 30% on their bills compared to gas. At the same time, we're reducing emissions for that heating and hot water by about 90% compared to gas, and significantly compared to a regular heat pump system. Why? Because we're operating it at high levels of efficiency and using that cleanest electricity. We're also getting very high levels of customer satisfaction. We have what you call a net promoter score of over 80, whereas a typical HVAC is around between 20 and 40. That means it works. So very proud of the results we've been able to achieve. And the key thing we're doing right now is bringing this to market. We've now deployed this in hundreds of California homes, close to 500. We started with single family homes. That has been our proof point. And clearly it's beginning to build momentum there. But we're very excited that 2025 has been the year that we've ventured into multifamily. We've done a couple of low income multifamily projects up in Truckee, in San Jose, and we have others planned. In fact, we have photos of them downstairs at the table in the lobby if you want to take a look. So I think I'm going to pause there and move on to the questions and discussion and any questions from the audience later on. Thank you.
Great. Well, really appreciate the concise and very informative visuals and the context behind them. Really happy to dive into some of the details. We're going to leave a little bit of time at the end to be able to get some audience Q&A. So I'm sure many of you are, the gears are spinning there, and you'll be able to ask questions. Yeah, I want to acknowledge Pierre Delforge there in the audience, who's a partner on Harvest. So thanks. I'm not sure you're going to learn a whole lot here, but thanks for coming. And so let's see. I guess want to sort of walk through a few different topics that you've mentioned a little bit, maybe in passing, but deepen the conversation a little bit about barriers. I think maybe for Doug and Paul, in particular, although Jane, you should feel free to jump in, sort of how do we balance the urgency of emissions reductions with the sort of realities of capital budgets and operational disruptions in large buildings, right? Doing a project is not a trivial thing to do. It requires a lot of planning. It requires the CFO to sign off. It's got a lot of sort of institutional inertia that's got to sort of overcome. And then it has to be financed, and sort of, everybody's got to be able to sign off on that. And so maybe just give a little color to how innovative projects actually happen in the real world, and what that really takes in terms of a team approach.
Yeah, it's a good question. Great question. So I think for large buildings, thinking about large commercial buildings, offices, labs, healthcare facilities, you have a couple of things working for you, right? It's owner occupied generally, and you also generally have fairly sophisticated facilities teams. You have dedicated on-site staff, right? But you have a lot of barriers as well, and a lot of those are just physical constraints about existing buildings. If you have an existing building that's 50 years old, that it was designed with a traditional chiller and a boiler, you have a big challenge there to fully electrify space heating, because the boiler, it's not a drag and drop solution, right? And if you have an air source heat pump equipment that you want to replace, you have to physically move the location outdoors, and the equipment is on the order of 10 times larger physically and heavier, and it adds to electrical capacity. So these are not small barriers to overcome, and you have to have the capital for these. So I would say, to address the urgency of these things in a way that's feasible, you need to have a strategic plan for the building where you're kind of capturing as many of these synergies with existing activities as possible, so you do this as cost effectively as you can. So you don't just jump in and say, we're going to replace our boiler with an air to water heat pump. Maybe you wait until the end of your chiller's life and then plan for that project, understand your constraints, understand what your actual loads are. And then when you know that, you replace the chiller and the boiler with an air to water heat pump plant, maybe one that does heat recovery as well. And just to tie it back to the slides I was presenting before, one of the ways building owners can get these relatively immediate emissions reductions is through efficiency measures. It's a hugely underestimated element of a decarbonization plan. Most people are familiar with like retro commissioning projects that save on the order of 5 or 10%. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about in-depth controls efficiency measures that save 50% of HVAC. And because you're saving energy rather than shifting from gas to electricity, they come with utility cost savings. So even though there's a small amount of cost upfront, they have relatively short paybacks that you can leverage to do other things with later while getting those emissions upfront.
Can I just a quick clarifying question? So is it in terms of doing energy? So glad you mentioned energy efficiency. I feel like we need to just wave that flag continually as high as we possibly can, because there's a lot of sort of forgetting about how critical efficiency has been to get us where we are in terms of our economic growth in our clean economy. It's still top of the loading order, still super important. Is there any, in a typical building, is there a possibility of using energy efficiency to be able to downsize the heat pump unit so that it can fit in the existing footprint or the existing area that's available, or is that sort of too much to ask for?
Well, it's a great question. Certainly the efficiency work will help with sizing. At the very least, it will help you understand better what the loads are in the building. A lot of equipment is just oversized because boilers are so cheap. But boilers in large buildings, some of them are up on a rooftop somewhere, but a lot of them are also in a plant room. Generally, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to site something in the same place without some sort of structural upgrade, just because the equipment is much larger. There are some cases where you can, but I think for the majority, if you want to fully electrify, that's a bit challenging. But the good part of it is if you just want to partially electrify, like work within the existing constraints of your space available or your electrical capacity, and retain the existing gas boilers, you can get the vast majority of your loads electrified with a very, very small heat pump, because you don't need most of that capacity all year round, right? You only need peak capacity on the coldest day of the year. The vast majority of the rest of the time, you need like 10% of capacity, so you can serve most of the annual energy consumption with a very, very small heat pump.
One boiler typically serves domestic hot water and heating, right? Is that fair?
It
depends on where you are.
It depends on, like in a hospital, like the one we're working in, they are tied together, but existing buildings have every kind of.
We've seen a few program funding, like the build program, or I guess the retrofit programs in large multifamily where a heat pump has been able to suffice for the domestic hot water, but it's been, it's different for the actual radiators, right? Or the heating of the building, right? So
that's exactly right.
So anyway, I'm talking too much here, Doug. Any sort of
not a lot to add there, but the long-term planning is really important, making it part of long-term planning. Paul mentioned with large commercial, you're fortunate to have sophisticated facilities people, but their focus really is on just the immediate. Is it working? Is there comfort? And expanding that to include energy. Now years ago, it was much more difficult of, occupant comfort and the happiness of your people costs way more than the energy it takes to put in the building. That's, especially in California, starting to change. So it will hopefully start making more of where there's more of a directed effort at energy management professionals who aren't looking at just the performance of the working of the system, but the performance and keeping track of incentives that might be available at state or federal level, and that can affect the financing of these projects, and making this just part of a long-term bill.
Great. Do you want to add anything, Jane, to that element? Or I have a question for you following, but just in case you want to add something there.
That was great.
Okay, great. So, one big perennial problem that everybody in this room has probably heard of is the split incentive problem. Where the person who is would garner the savings from an investment isn't the person who actually owns the asset, and so therefore, there's no incentive for the owner to invest. And so there are some interesting solutions to that, contractual leasing, terms and things like that. But hasn't been any silver bullet. I'm not going to ask you for a silver bullet, but I guess, how do you address the split incentive problem, in your sort of world with such an integrative technology like Harvests?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right, it's been top of our mind, particularly as we focus on multifamily homes. So when you're looking at, say, multifamily homes which are rented out to properties, you've got the two stakeholders. The key thing is to really make sure you understand the needs of the different stakeholders and that you systematically are able to address those needs. So you really have to do your homework. From the tenant's perspective, in most cases, not all, the tenant is responsible for utility bills. So for them, you need to get those bills down as low as possible. If you don't get them down, there is the potential for downward pressure on rents for the property owner. There's also the potential for turnover of tenants as well. So keeping those bills down primarily helps the tenant, but it does also help the property owner as well. The second thing, though, is the property owner, which is a real decision maker. They're not directly benefiting from lower bills. So you have to make the economics work from an upfront cost perspective. You also have to make the system cost effective and easy and systematic to be able to maintain. That means you need to make sure your device is smart, easy to monitor, to control, so that the operation, the maintenance is not a challenge for the property owner. But the core at the end of the day is the upfront cost. Now, as a product manufacturer, our job and a lot of the work we'll be doing in the coming months and years is get the cost down. And we have clear trajectories to get those costs down for fully installed cost system by 30 to 40% by integration, by installability. But at the end of the day, you still need, just as we did for solar, we need the support right now in terms of incentives, tax credits, appropriately designed rates, and even policies that support, say, grid flexible technology to help with the upfront economics and help this, you know, we're all partners working on how do we electrify homes, how do we support the grid, and we all have a role to play. And those incentives and programs are really important to get it kickstarted.
Yeah, there we go. So thanks so much for that. And you know, I think a few people have, maybe all of you, brought up flexibility in one form or another. I mean, the Flex Lab, we were very hugely psyched to fund that back in the day, and that's borne a lot of fruit. And actually, if you still do tours, that'd be, I mean, it's a really cool thing to see, like the spinning. You know, they're basically able to spin the whole facility on a little plate and underneath it, and produce, you know, a whole year's worth of data in an afternoon, or, you know, in a day, basically. It's very, very cool. So let's see, I guess for this is a question for all three of you. I mean, we're Epic, right? Where we fund a lot of technology innovation. That's kind of the core of what Epic does. And through different stages of technology development, kind of trying to tailor the sub-programs within Epic to meet needs that really challenge, that meet the challenges of the technology developers and innovators, so they can get over the valley of death, and so they can start to commercialize and dial their product in, and then start to get some scale. So with respect to large scale heat pumps, what technology advances make them more feasible for partial or full electrification in existing buildings? And I think, Paul, you sort of talked about this a little bit, but what sort of barriers remain that we can that we need to solve for?
Yeah, so I think for when you think about large buildings like hospitals, large offices, most of those existing buildings are designed around really high water temperatures for heating, right? So on a even mild day, they need relatively high temperature water. And that poses a big challenge for retrofitting them cost effectively, because unless you're gutting the building as part of your retrofit, at which point it's basically new construction.
So do they actually need that hot water, that high temperature hot water, or are there a lot of uses for which they need to mix it down?
So for like space heating, like if this was a much older building, in some buildings, the coils in the VAV boxes in this room would be sized for 180-degree water. And a lot of climates, there's a lot of oversizing, so you could probably get away with maybe 150, or maybe even 140, but that's a challenge for a lot of the existing heat pumps on the market. But it depends on the type of existing building. And there's other uses for hot water, like for domestic hot water, that you could leverage at lower temperatures. Right. But some of the latest innovations have heat pump equipment that can generate hot water at higher temperatures, like CO2 heat pumps, or some of these new screw chillers. These are really large heat recovery chillers, and that makes them more directly applicable for retrofit applications, because you can service all of the building's heating loads throughout the year and make water that's hot enough to make that work in an existing building context. You take an efficiency hit, but so you don't want to do it unless you have to. But if it allows you to feasibly electrify without replacing terminal equipment, it can really make a big difference to a project working or not.
Yep. Great. Jane or Paul or Doug?
I'm just going to go quickly. I want to make sure Doug also has time. So when I think about new technologies, there's a lot of exciting things happening, but two come top of mind. One is thermal energy storage. This is now proven mature. It used to be a science project. That is no longer the case. This is deployed in hundreds and hundreds of buildings, and it is shifting load. It is reducing emissions. It is bills. And that really, you know, from a heat pump perspective, that unlocks two of the big problems about heat pumps, which is grid impact and costs. Thermal energy storage very cost effectively solves them both in one fell swoop.
The other technology I'd like to flag is reversible air-to-water heat pumps. These are gaining in performance, so more and more entering the US market. They've been deployed for many years in Europe and other regions, but now they're entering more the US market. They're gaining in efficiency. They're using lower GWP refrigerants. They're performing better at lower temperatures. But from my perspective, they are also the engine for thermal energy storage because they generate hot water, which can be the storage medium to allow the expansion cost effectively of heating hot water with storage and cooling with one single device.
Could you describe the sort of what's going on there technically, where like in an AC environment, you're using the waste heat to heat the water, and just sort of talk about how that works? I'm not sure everybody sort of tunes. I mean, many people will understand that already in the audience, but not everybody's an expert on heat pumps.
So there are multiple variants. There are very many ways to make this work. What we at Harvest have done is we're really focusing on that load shifting for the heating and hot water side, because that is the largest energy use at the home, and it's also the new load that we're adding to the grid. A similar approach can be taken for cooling as well. We're just not seeing that the amount is sufficient. I suspect in Phoenix, in Houston, those are applications, and we can certainly work on that. But right now, what we're doing is the cooling is basically standard cooling. The heating and hot water is load shifted.
Got it. So I think maybe it's always a little bit surprising, even though we've known this for many years, that much of California is actually heating dominated climate. Even here where we are in the Central Valley, where we think of it as getting incredibly hot in the summertime and we suffer through that, actually it's a heating dominated climate because it tends to cool down at night in the summer, and you can't really and you can't say that it warms up during the winter like in the middle of the night. So it's always cold in the winter, and it's like not always hot in the summer. And so that application actually is really perfect for this part of the world. So thanks for describing that. Doug?
Yeah, I'll just emphasize that point about living in the Bay Area as much as I struggle with my own house we don't have to do any cooling, but boy, do we have to do a lot of heating. So it is true, which you wouldn't think about being in California. So Paul and Jay both covered exactly the high temperature I want to talk about and thermal energy storage. I guess the last thing would be that there are certain efficiency challenges, particularly with CO2, like compared to ammonia, another low, can't say it. And there are new like adiabatic expansion, different things that are technologies that you could apply to the CO2 refrigerant that are bringing those efficiencies much closer.
So refrigerant choice and adapting to the new low GWP refrigerants, that's a challenge. So Doug, a question for you, following onto that a little bit, but maybe shifting gears as well. So controls, I think, so one of the areas of technologies that is obviously this today, it's the sky is kind of the limit, and is controls, digital tools, building energy management systems, and then moving into AI, no doubt, right? Predictive maintenance. I know the lab has been doing a lot of work on commercial buildings and predictive maintenance. So how do you see these tools transforming, sort of being applicable to retrofit situations and helping with the existing buildings? We talked about a lot of the sort of challenges with existing buildings where you're sort of like shoehorning a new technology into something that wasn't built for it. How can the digital tools and systems transform retrofit outcomes?
So I think, first of all, what they can do is even they're thought of as being primarily control, but even before they're controlling equipment in the building or controlling new equipment and sort of controlling a new heat pump, collecting data and analyzing that data for getting the proper load sizing for your heat pump. One of the bigger problems is oversizing. So taking advantage of your BMS and all the data collection and analysis you can do with that. That I think is a big advantage. There's also, and I want to do a little plug and point out for another LBL project. Armando Casillas is here, and he has a poster downstairs for HP Flex. And that is a model predictive control for heat pumps. Basically, you take a model and forecast what conditions will be, make your settings, and it'll continuously learn. Somewhat, it's not quite AI, but since everybody loves AI, we'll call it a mini AI. So and those would be the two that I'd say.
Great. Cool. That's terrific. Thanks for that answer. So let's see. I want to ask two more questions, and first one going to Jane, and then we have I think we have 17 minutes left. So I want to leave a little time for audience questions. But you've been working on financing solutions, and I just want to give you a chance to talk about some of the exciting things happening there. You know, perennial challenge, capital for these kinds of projects can be very hard to come by, and sort of how can we make it pencil and just sort of make it attractive to the capital, you know, the capitalized, you know, stakeholders here and interest and investors.
Thank you. This is a question which is very dear to me right now, and something that we're spending a lot of time and thought working on. Because at the end of the day, this is an economic problem, right? We have to figure out how can electrification work economically, not just for the well-meaning well-off who have tens of thousands of dollars in their bank account to front the system, get the rebates later, and then benefit from the system, but everybody else, which is the vast majority of Californians. From a manufacturer's perspective, we're taking responsibility. The next projects that we want to work on, it's all about integration. It's all about cost down. And as I mentioned earlier, we believe we can get 30 to 40% more down out of the system, but it's going to take time, it's going to take work, and we're going to be on it. But in parallel, financing can really help a lot. And we've been successful in California with solar financing, such as leases. And something very similar can apply to HVAC. And by lease, I mean a third-party owned system, whereby you have a system installed in your home. Somebody else takes care of the installation, the maintenance, capturing the incentives. You pay a monthly fee. And at the end of 5 years or 10 years, you own that system. That has avoided or minimized the upfront cost. And that is a gate that opens the door to electrification to so many more people. So that's what we're really excited about working on. It's really down to the nuts and bolts of how we get that to work. A key thing is, of course, is if you have a third-party owned system, will it be eligible for the rebates and tax credits? Because if we end up adding a financing but taking away rebates, we're helping in one way and hurting on the other. So we need to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted so that it can really get the full stack to remove that friction and enable electrification to be a $0 down product that you pay progressively over time and then you own.
Well, hallelujah. That was great. I wanted to mention actually that there's taking that idea and extending it to sort of the entire electric system. There's some really innovative stuff going on with the utility business model itself, not yet in California, but you know, in UK and other places where the utility itself is in a position of providing services. So, you know, temperature services in homes, you know, a certain amount of reliability and, you know, sort of, you know, cold beer and hot water, right? That's kind of, and so as long as people have their, you know, they have a healthy indoor environment that's affordable, then the utility maybe actually helps them make some of these investments so that they can avoid investing more in the distribution grid so that they can really, you know, they're in best position to calculate and sort of keep track of the upstream impacts of load growth, for example. And so they can, you know, that sort of is aligning incentives in a very important way across the utilities. And so that giving them a reason to have partnerships with companies like Harvest and you know, working in a proactive way to improve buildings to make their own lives easier as you know, regulated service providers, you know, as utilities and monopoly entities. So I don't know if any of you have any experience with that, like Octopus Energy in UK and others.
So yeah, these are all folks that we've talked to
Great.
and are talking to, and I think we are really at the beginning of a lot of opportunity. Right now, it's typically between the property owner, the homeowner, the manufacturer, and the contractor. But clearly, utilities and grid operators have got huge stakes in this. And if you're able to work together, provide a system that's win-win-win, lower costs, grid flexibility, we need to figure out how we monetize that so that we reduce the upfront friction so that it can be adopted and so that we can reap the benefits as a society in terms of a cleaner, more sustainable grid.
Absolutely. So really appreciate that thoughtful input or answer. So let's see, Paul, I wanted to ask you about sort of state and local governments and how we and they, cities and counties can play a role in de-risking early adoption of emerging technologies.
Yeah, thanks. I think what I'd love to see is more public funding for state and local governments to be able to do this in their own buildings and share the constraints they faced in that particular building, share the design solutions they came up with, share the lessons learned from what worked and what didn't, right? And also share the actual performance. So those outcomes are kind of shared with the public, and it closes an information gap that otherwise takes decades to close by industry, right? It's that feedback loop doesn't happen in privately held buildings. Nobody's summarizing how that went and sharing it with the public, right? So I'd love to see projects that are able to do that. And unfortunately, like the DGS has a bunch of existing building electrification projects that we're studying. One up in a Caltrans building up in Eureka, and there's several more coming up that we'll be studying as part of this current CEC project. So we'll be publicizing what they did, what the outcomes were, lessons learned. So if you have any other buildings that do that, that want to share those results, come talk to me after.
Fantastic. And in terms of capital, they've got municipal bond authorities. I mean, obviously some of them are overstretched, but many of them still have space to actually fund, at relatively affordable cost, those capital improvements. So I'm going to ask one more question to all three, but get your questions ready. And how are we delivering questions? Are we just having people stand up? Or is there a mic? Okay, there's a mic that's going to go around. So final question, and maybe start with Doug and then come this direction. If you could give one piece of advice to large building owners looking to decarbonize, what would it be?
I'm really biased toward the power of data and the appreciation of collecting data, analyzing it, learning from it, using it as a tool. I'd really like to see commercial buildings, or a lot of industry and energy areas, particularly commercial buildings, sort of take on or watch the movie Moneyball and see the value that data analysis gave in unexpected ways. And now every team is doing it. So hopefully we can get a similar Moneyball type of thing.
All right, so you're the Brad Pitt here. That's great.
So one thing we've heard a lot in the energy space, and particularly those of us focused on climate mitigation, has been, we need to develop the technology. We're going to get there. We need to work on this. We need to work on that. I would like to say to folks, we're there. Don't wait. The technology is now mature. We can electrify buildings now and do it in a way that is cost effective, that is comfortable, that's sustainable, that's durable. And we've got a great stack of incentives, so it makes good economic sense. So I'd say go for it. That's my word of advice.
Yeah, I'll go back to my strategic plan perspective for these really large buildings. They're all their unique little snowflake. They all have their own specific constraints depending on the age of the building and design. And you need to have a plan so you can leverage those synergies. So start by measuring your existing loads, do as much efficiency work as you can, then do some stress tests over winter so you know what temperatures you actually need rather than what the building was designed for. And then that's at the point at which you start designing the electrification solution, right? So you can do it as cost effectively with as minimal disruption as possible, and potentially aligning it with other existing major capital projects like chiller replacements and boilers, because that's the way we're going to get there in these really big, 100, 200,000 square foot buildings and up, with these complex built up systems.
Well, and I would advise building owners to talk to experts like our three panelists. So really appreciate all the light you're shedding on this complex topic and this super important topic for meeting our carbon goals in the state and beyond. So anybody have any questions? Oh, come on. There we go. There's one.
Thank you. I have sort of two really good things about. One is energy efficiency, which is related to demand reduction, and also financing. So are there any initiatives already happening where maybe the energy efficiency measures can be sort of built into a package with, let's say, heat pumps or whatnot, as part of a rebate or an incentive program? Are there any initiatives in that direction? And by the efficiency measures, I mean something like envelope improvements.
The great question. Thanks a lot. And I always am supportive of energy efficiency as part of the package. And I think you'll find a sort of landscape of programs that target certain buildings in certain areas and the like. But I wonder if panelists can sort of talk about, well, so we've had ESCOs and EPCs and that kind of thing as one way to bring private capital into the existing building. That's energy services companies and energy performance contractors. And so I think, in fact, LBL, the energy policy group, I guess, I think of it as Chuck and Joe, but they're gone. But have done a lot of work sort of tracking the ESCO kind of business model and offerings over the years. I'm wondering if that, or those models, or any other sort of ways to bring private capital into these sectors, large buildings, you might want to reemphasize or emphasize. No, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I would advise actually just look at, there's a series of reports looking at the ESCOs across the US that LBL has put together over many years. I think its evolution is pretty instructive, but it is one way to bring like off balance sheet capital to energy improvement projects. But I don't know, Paul, you want to add anything, or Jane?
Again, it kind of depends on the specific case, but for really large organizations, they can sometimes finance energy efficiency projects, in-depth energy efficiency projects, through savings from past projects. So I've seen some organizations kind of kickstart this with some initial small amount of capital, deploy that on a building, measure the savings, and then use that to potentially hire more staff internally at the facilities to leverage this. The ESCO's approach is also a very solid approach to doing this. I think there's a split in a little bit of an incentive gap there to get to the type of savings that I presented there. Is a much more in-depth kind of controls effort than a typical retro commissioning that would be done by an ESCO. So there is more upfront effort and more upfront cost associated with it. But that's the type of efficiency you need to do to really get your building set up well for electrification, and doing that as efficiently as possible. So it's kind of in that gray area between the light touch, 2-year payback, and the, I have to find the capital to replace an entire cooling plant. So it is a challenge for sure.
Great, but yeah, there are tools in the toolbox. It's not that the toolbox is empty. So more questions. Let's see. I think we have one right there, and then Smita, and then Gypsy. You're not. Oh, there. I didn't even see you back there. Okay. Is that on?
Does it work?
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. I just had a question, I guess it's to Paul, but it's about, 80% is like great, but we want to get to 100% because we want to get rid of the fossil gas altogether. So what's your idea? Is it like eventually, like with Harvest or whatever, we'll design better heat pumps, or what's your idea of like how to get that last 20%?
It's a great question. I'm trying to highlight that it's to do this as cost effectively as possible. You have to leverage synergies with existing life that's in equipment, right? If you have a 5-year-old chiller that costs $1 million that you just put into your building, you just can't replace that in any feasible way in the next 10-20 years. In that interim, we need to find solutions that are making huge emissions reductions now as fast as we can before we fully electrify. If your chiller is dead in the water today and it's feasible for you to fully electrify today, and you have the capital for that, and there's lots of projects where that's possible, for sure, go ahead and do it. But don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If you can get to 80% today, let's worry about the last 10 or 20%. down the road when it's feasible to
But
do that.
the point is that there's not necessarily a lock-in for that, having that 20% go on forever, right?
Well, in large buildings,
it's-
it's usually multiple pieces of
Yeah.
equipment. So maybe in 20 years' time, you'll have a major renovation, or
Yeah.
you'll have to expand like square footage or replace a central plant, at
Right.
which point then you can capture that.
They have some
remaining
future
20%.
opportunities to get to complete the
Right.
job.
It's
Yeah.
all about having that plan to leverage what's going to be happening in the
Yeah.
building anyway, to reduce overall costs
Incremental,
and
yeah.
make it more feasible to happen.
Yeah, Jane,
yeah.
sorry, I'm just trying to
Oh,
keep
yeah,
things
and
moving along.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of projects where an owner will have a boiler fail and they'll get an assessment for what it would take to fully electrify that. They haven't planned for it. They haven't downsized the equipment, and they'll see this frankly catastrophic first cost quote come in, and then they'll do nothing. And I want to avoid that situation.
They'll replace like for like.
They will just do
Yeah.
another boiler and they'll forget about it. I want to capture the 80% at that point, right?
Change you want to add?
Just really adding, I mean, as you were saying, what we want to avoid is new gas furnaces going in today that are going to be in homes and in buildings for 20, 25 years. That's really sad if that happens. So anything we can do to avoid that.
Yeah, Doug, do you want to add anything? Okay, great. Looks like we have a couple more questions we're gonna have to choose. So Gypsy, and then anyway, we have a sort of self-selection going on here.
Well, I was thinking about campuses, and particularly campuses that are powered by central plants. What are you thinking for those types of situations?
That's a great question. I think there's some great examples here in California already. The Stanford campus. I think I'm still allowed to say that.
Yeah, well, you have some Berkeley alums here, but I'll allow it.
I'll let them. I'll give them this. They did a great job on that campus retrofit, and there's lots more campuses that are leaning into that at different stages of development, including UC Berkeley and some of the other state universities. So I think they're in, again, one of the like unique buckets, right? They have a large campus of buildings. They're geographically concentrated. They generally have the ability to build a central plant that serves all of those relatively easily. Not all large buildings fit in that bucket, even if they're owned by the same owner, right? So those types of solutions, I think, really have a huge potential for thermal storage solutions, and most of the existing central plant retrofits that are partially or fully electric are leveraging that, which is really great to see.
Yeah, I was just going to say UC Merced in San Diego. UC Merced has big thermal energy storage. And
UC Irvine was built around one too. Yeah. Any sort of particular considerations for retrofits? We're gonna have to wrap up after this question, I think. Sort of existing campuses versus sort of building new, which is significantly easier.
For central plants?
For larger thermal storage central plants.
Well, thermal storage gets per building serves gets cheaper the bigger you make it, right? So it's helps having that geographic concentration. But if it's an existing campus, you have constrained space, and then most of the buildings, at least some of the buildings, will be designed for much higher water temperatures. So there's always a trade-off between what temperature you make the central plant make and how many of those buildings you fix to use lower water temperatures, or you try and make really hot water for all of them.
Or you could have a boost in the building or something. Yeah.
There's compromises
Yeah.
to be made, and they're very complex designs that take like many years of planning to do well.
And military bases as well. We've got some work going on with the Navy and other arms and military to address some of these issues in their campuses. And you know, it's a very unique environment, but you know, with a fair amount of capital. Doug, were you going to say something on this one?
And the military bases.
Oh, sorry, that was me.
One thing, and I don't know if it's as much for large commercial, but on military bases, there are great projects, demonstration projects, and actual operational initiatives that don't have the right staff to keep these new technologies going. And so one, we're working with Camp Parks. They're starting a new ESCO or EPSC as a way to, you know, find the right talent to actually keep complex distributed energy resource systems functioning.
Great. Well, we're going to have to end it there, actually. So let's give a big round of applause to Doug, Jane, and Paul. Thank you very much.
If you are interested in staying for the affordability enabled by utility grid modernization, you are in the right room. This is conference room 221BC. We are getting started at 2:50, so there's a 10-minute break. There's a symposium breakout down in the auditorium for the integration of climate data products into electricity sector planning and policy. Both of those start at 2:50. So you're welcome to enjoy a moment or two, get a coffee, come on back. We'll be starting at 2:50. Adam Gottlieb. I work with the Energy Commission's Research and Development Unit, especially the Outreach and Engagement Place. Please come in, take a seat. We are about to get started for the session Affordability Enabled by Utility Grid Modernization. Wanted to thank you for sharing part of your day with us, and also wanted to explicitly thank our panel and our moderator, Laura Clivens. Laura is a climate reporter at KQED, the NPR and PBS member station in San Francisco. Her reporting focuses on solutions to the climate crisis and the human stories behind them, from decarbonizing buildings to vehicles to emerging technologies and sustainable fashion. An Emmy award-winning journalist, Laura regularly hosts and moderates in-depth conversations on climate, policy, and progress. She holds degrees from UC Berkeley, Harvard, and Northwestern. Not too bad. I'm happy to pass the baton to my esteemed moderator, and take it away, Laura. Thank you for moderating.
There we go. Now it's on. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Hello and welcome. Thanks for the introduction, Adam. We are joined by some wonderful people today. We will be talking about the grid. The nation's electric grid. It was largely created in the late 19th and the 20th century, but today it has to handle a much wider mix of energy sources and deal with more extreme weather events. Epic innovations can help develop tools and strategies to modernize a formerly rigid grid. So I'd like to welcome a distinguished group of panelists here. They have received EPIC funding, and they are going to share some insights from their projects and hopefully inform you all. We have right here, we have Franz Stadtmuller. Franz is a principal electrical engineer in grid and electrical innovation at PG&E's Applied Technology Services Department. He's a subject matter expert in the area of power system modeling and electrical testing, and most recent work on PG&E's ground fault neutralizer project, grid forming inverters, and distribution microgrids in engineering. If you don't know what all those words mean, that's fine. We'll try to break it all down for you. Over here we have Aaron Louie in the middle here. He's a senior consulting engineer with PG&E as well, where he serves on the transmission line standards and work methods team. Over the past decade, he's held key roles in transmission line design and project engineering. He's recognized as a subject matter expert in transmission line ratings, infrared inspections, and transmission line fiber optic design considerations. And then all the way at the end, we have, hailing from Southern California, we have Farzad Khalilpour. He is a senior technical lead at Southern California Edison, where he works on cutting edge technology innovations. His work includes virtual protection relay substations, substation and distribution automation, machine learning at the edge, microgrid controls, DERMS integration, and distribution load management. Let's welcome them all with some applause. Thank you so much for joining. All right, so to kick off, let's hear from each of you about your project. What is it and where are you in the process? Aaron, can we start with you? You gotta press the button. There you go.
How about that? Be good? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As Laura mentioned, my name is Aaron Louie. I'm with PG&E. I'm here today to talk to you guys about EPIC 4.05. I think the actual name of the project is Dynamic Line Rating and Asset Health Monitoring. Before I jump into what the project is, feedback. Good. Before we jump into what the project is, I want to take a moment to explain what the grid actually is. I don't think we have our visuals correct, or maybe we do. Oh, okay. Well, here we go. So the image that you see here on the screen is a simplified representation of what the grid is. You'll see that there in the upper part of the screen, there are generation facilities. These are places outside of the city center that are where our electricity is essentially generated. These can be things like nuclear plants, like solar farms, wind farms, natural gas-fired plants, things of that sort. Oftentimes, these facilities are located far away from our city centers, our end users, and our customers, such as yourself. So when the electricity is generated at these facilities, it has to travel hundreds of miles to get to the city centers where the end customers are. This is where overhead transmission lines come into play and where EPIC 4.05 takes place. So when this electricity is created, it's transferred at a very high voltage across the state into our city centers, into our substations, where it then gets brought down to a more usable voltage level where it enters our distribution system. And then from there, it goes from all of our distribution lines that crisscross the city or through underground facilities, hits our transformers, and eventually makes its way to our lights here, our outlets, and your homes. So what we're going to talk about today, or what I'm going to talk about, is enhancements that we're making to the overhead transmission lines. Again, these are the large-scale lattice structures that you see when you're driving on the highway. These are not necessarily the structures that you see in your neighborhood or across the street from your house. And to really understand what our project is accomplishing, you need to understand how energy is limited and how it can be transferred through our system. Really, the name of the game is heat. How hot can our assets get? This is something that PG&E determines and says, we are going to allow our conductors to get up to X number of degrees Celsius. And what they do with that information is we then do analysis and studies to determine what is a symbolic representation of an average day in our territory. We take a reasonably high temperature or reasonable wind speed, and we do a calculation to say, here is what our line ratings are. Here's how much capacity we can pump through our lines before they overheat, before they degrade or anneal or any sort of degradation to the assets. So what EPIC 4.05 is doing is it's challenging those static assumptions that we've made before in the past. PG&E, like many other utilities, operates on what's called a seasonal static limit, meaning that we have ratings for the summertime and ratings for the wintertime. In both of these cases, again, there was a system-wide study to say, here's what a reasonable assumption is for the weather, for the wind, and the temperature. This feeds into an equation that, when combined with how much power goes to the line, that spits out a temperature of what the conductors actually are. So instead of using static limitations that are based off of a single representative day, what we are trying to do is deploy various sensor and sensorless technologies that can feed real-time information into the grid that can say, it is now 2:57 on a Tuesday afternoon in Sacramento, California. I know exactly what my temperature is. I know exactly what my wind speed is. And from there, I can calculate exactly what my actual ampacity and transfer capabilities of our system is. And so by doing this, we are trying to build a more connected grid, a more smarter grid, a more intelligent, informed grid that's better utilized and more efficiently operated.
So Aaron, if you're going to just give us like the elevator pitch, the problem you are trying to address is what? And then the solution, like this could offer what kind of solution?
Sure. And so I think maybe in prior presentations, what we've talked about is the need to address various climate changing phenomena. So I think we're seeing a lot more violent and volatile weather patterns, warmer summers, cooler winters, or I'm sorry, cooler summers and warmer winters. We're also seeing shifts in utilization throughout the system. So whereas before we would see typical load patterns occurring maybe in the morning hours when folks wake up and the evening hours when they return home from work, we're now seeing things like the adoption of EV technologies. We're seeing peaks that occur in the middle of the night. We're also seeing more sustainable power being brought into the grid. So that includes things like wind and solar. And so these two things combined are changing the way that our grid operates and when demand is needed and when it's available. So what our project is trying to do is to say, before we would say we can only allow X amount of power to flow through the system based off a very conservative assumption, but that conservative assumption is true 99% of the time. So by definition, there's going to be periods of time where we can squeeze more power out of the grid. We can transmit more energy through the system. The other side, and the equally important side, is that when we made our baseline assumptions, these were based off of, say, the 99th percentile day that the PG&E territory experiences. Well, there are going to be times by design where we exceed those temperatures. During those periods of time, we should be throttling down our assets. We should not be running as much power through our system, because in doing so, we can degrade our assets or we can risk overheating our lines and sagging them closer to the ground as they heat up. And so we're just trying to build a more efficient grid that's both pumps more when we need it and throttles back when appropriate.
Thank you. All right, Franz, let's go to you. So what's your project and where are you in the process?
Sure. I think I have a slide if you're able to go to the next one. That's for him, I think. Yeah, he's probably got a couple. There we go. Thank you. So my project is Epic 407. So we're developing new battery energy storage controls for capacity and voltage support. So he discussed the different layers of the electric grid. So he's working on transmission. So my project is focused more on the distribution system. So you might observe poles and lines running through neighborhoods or through rural communities. So we're really targeting a rural community and long distribution circuit in Humboldt County that's had new customer applications waiting to connect for service, but the capacity of the circuit is limited. So rather than reconductoring miles and miles of line or running a new express feeder, we're looking to implement these new controls that we've been developing in our lab to dispatch the battery in real time and free up that capacity through the battery discharging rather than doing wire and pole upgrades. So we think we can do this at a lower cost than conventional reconductoring. So we call this a non-wires alternative solution. So the focus of the project is developing this new control method that uses local measurements. And one key aspect of it is it's supporting the voltage in a more direct way. So I won't get too much in the technical details, but when you get to the end of line, you can run into voltage issues due to the voltage drop. So we're using a special feature of the battery to really support that and get even more capacity out of it. So this is just illustrating a simplified diagram where you have the distribution substation miles and miles away. And on that previous slide, I showed the distance for scale. So the battery is about 40 miles electrically away from the substation. So for distribution, that's a far distance. For transmission, that's not really any distance, but for the distribution levels, that is a very far distance. So we're providing electric service to numerous towns along the way. And so to allow more capacity, the battery is located near the end of line to allow that capacity to be freed up all the way up to the substation. And on this plot, it just shows an example load profile. So based on the hour of the day, the load on the circuit changes. So the red line is what we call the forecast baseline in the future state with all these new loads. And the yellow line is the limit. So we're using the battery and these new controls to discharge the battery when we're at that peak and keep the load within the limits of the circuit. So that's how we're freeing up the capacity. So that's the start of my project. Thanks.
And so when you are not using like peak power on that line, you're basically charging the battery when towns aren't pulling it off.
Correct. Yeah. If you go back to that slide, if you notice in the early morning and late evening hours, the blue line is above the red line. So that's when we're charging the battery when we have extra capacity. And then we're discharging it during the peak time. So we have extra capacity at night, and then we need the capacity during the daylight hours.
Great. All right. Farzad, let's hear from you. What is your project? Where are you in it?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Farzad Kalipur, the senior engineer from Grid Technology Innovations in California, Edison. Next page, next item, please. So this afternoon, I would like to talk about the CIDR project. CIDR is stability and flexibility improvement with DERs. And objective of this project is to demonstrate the technology and integrate multiple third-party aggregators platforms to assess their system, to establish the communication with them, and understand that what we can do and what we cannot do throughout the aggregators connected to their system with different type of the EVs and different type of the DRs that we have in the distribution systems. This project is kind of DR orchestration platform. Our focus would be on the integrating of the different type of DRs to the DERMS system, and also utilizing some type of the communications, exchanging data between the DERs and also back office DERMS system to understand that in the different type of the events that we may have on distribution systems, what we can do with the larger amount of the EVs on the distribution grid sites.
Farzad, I'm just wondering before, just if I
Sure.
can interrupt you for a second. I think we have a lot of people who are familiar with some of this stuff, but can you just lay out what you mean by DER and DERMS in here? Like, try to give us a simple example of what this does overall, the concept.
Yeah, sure. DR stands for distribution energy resources. Anything on the distribution side that can act as a energy resources. It could be electric vehicles that we call it EV. It could be larger size like batteries installed at the homes, communities, or schools or campuses. When we discuss about the terms, that means distribution energy resource management system that utility companies like SCEs, like SC have developed on their back office in order to communicate and bring all of this type of the DERs information to back office and manage this type of the DERs. This project's main portion is that utilizing that back office DERMS system, establishing the communications with external companies like aggregators, and utilize them to onboard and use different type of the energy resources that we have at the distribution system level. We will look at different technical perspectives of the energy resources. We will look at that bidirectional capabilities that they have, and also we will utilize different pricing methods. It would be time of the use theory usually we have in the companies, and also we will utilize dynamic pricing of the energy, a part of this project. The project aimed to have 3 different phases. Phase 1 that we already passed was putting together the technical requirements, that what exactly we are looking for, how this communication needs to establish, and also going through the RFI and RFP processes to down select the vendors that we want to do. As a second phase, we'll look at the interoperability of testing between utility platforms and third-party aggregators and test out within the lab environment. Main phase of this project, which is field implementation, we will utilize our production environment connected to aggregators, connecting to thousands of the EVs to understand that what kind of the situations we can utilize the EVs to overcome the constraints and limitations we have on the grid.
That's very exciting. Okay, so you are in between phase 1 and phase 2 right now?
We just completed the phase 1. We are moving to phase 2. Thanks.
Okay, and then Aaron and Franz, where are you all on your projects right now?
Yeah, so we're actually at a pretty exciting time in our project right now. We just wrapped up our installation activities for the majority of our vendors. So to kind of give a little more context behind our project, we also went through an RFI, RFP process, similar to what Farzad's referring to. We went through an onboarding process with our vendors. We went through a deep dive into the different technologies, discussions internal and external, determining what is the best group of technologies that we want to investigate and evaluate. So that took, a significant amount of time, but we did our due diligence to find the right mix of what we were hoping to look for. What we have just completed now is various installation activities for 3 of the 4 vendors. So those vendors, and I think there was a picture up earlier. I don't know if we want to flip back to the second image. Further back. Yeah, guy on the truck.
Back. Picture of a man in the sky.
Yeah.
There.
To give some context behind what these things look like. So again, we're talking about the giant transmission lines that crisscross the state. What you'll see on that image on the left, it's really hard to see, and I apologize for the size of the image, but on the far right side of that line, you'll see 2 devices that are attached to the line. Those devices communicate via satellite and cellular communication to the grid. And so these devices literally just went up 2 weeks ago when we were out in the field. And so this just went up. And so we just started collecting data. That image on the right happened several weeks after the fact. There's not a big fancy image of what went out there, but what that one on the right is doing is it's a laser interrogator unit that is using pre-existing fiber on our lines to shoot a laser down the line and to turn that into a giant acoustical, vibration sensor that can then determine what the wind speed is on our lines and then determine what the capacity is in the line. So it's really cool technology, a lot of black magic. And if you look on the screen, it doesn't look like anything to the naked eye. It's just a big blob. And if you could see up close the image, there's just a crisscross of patterns. It's really pretty to look at. It doesn't really mean a lot to everyone here in the room, myself included. But as I said, these devices went in over the past month. And so now we are just starting to get data coming in. We're just starting to work on calibration with the different vendors. It's a really interesting time right now. So
thanks. Thank you. What about you, Franz?
Yeah, we're currently in the design and lab testing phase. So we've designed the controller. We've built out the test bed in the lab. So we're getting ready to run the controller. We have a scaled down version of the batteries that'll be in the field. We have a scaled down version in the lab. So we're actually doing power hardware in the loop testing is what we call it. So we have a test bed where we simulate the grid, and the battery is connected to a grid simulator. So we can test our controls in real time in the lab, and our controller thinks it's connected to a real grid. And then once we finish the build out in the field, then we'll have the same controller and just larger batteries in the field. So we're working on the site design in the field right now, with construction plan to start early next year. And then we'll commission and test in the field and part of next year.
Okay, so in terms of who you are all working with, who are the partners you need to involve, and how are you best bringing them into your work? Aaron, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So we are working with a large number of folks here on the project. I think I'll start for the very beginning. We're working with EPRI, who I think actually has a table out here, the Electrical Power Research Institute. They do a lot of great work in the electricity space. They've done a lot of what we call dynamic line rating projects or other utilities. So really working with them, they're functioning as sort of an arbitrator or a judge to help us evaluate the different technologies that are out there. So in addition to our 4 technologies that we've hand selected, we have also installed different EPRI sensors and weather stations out there in the field. Because really the name of the game for this project is it's a demonstration project. If you talk to anyone in marketing or sales at any company, they will tell you all of the great things that their company is doing, but they don't always tell you the limitations, the accuracy concerns, the costs, other complexities that come along with this. And so EPRI has been a key member of our project, helping us shepherd us through this process, things to look out for, things to be aware of, helping us design and determine what our criteria is for success. What is a go, no go, what's passing rating, understanding what the risk is to our system if we overload our lines, what is the risk if we underrate our assets, and things of that sort. We're also working with a large number of utilities, Southern Cal Edison included. Thinking about this project is it's not a competitive environment. We're not working against Edison. We're not working against SMUD. We're not working against San Diego Gas and Electric. This is kind of a rising tide situation where it's not just PG&E that's looking at dynamic line rating. And I say dynamic line rating, the other half of the project is asset health monitoring. The idea is that we collect all this data. It also just gives a more informed grid. But as I was saying, it's not just PG&E doing this. We have constant communication with many of the utilities out there. Through our communications with EPRI, we've met other project sponsors that are leading their own efforts in, New York, at XL, at BPA, other utilities throughout the country. We are also working and are active participants in IEEE, which has conferences several times a year that work in this space. We also participate in the North American Transmission Forums. All this to say, we are not alone in this effort. There are a lot of people that are trying to unlock and uncork this extra capacity and this extra grid innovation. And so there's a lot of external conversations, because we find that there's only one Aaron Louie at PG&E, but there's an Aaron Louie at Southern Cal Edison, there's an Aaron Louie at every other utility. And by leveraging these relationships and connections we've made, we can share lessons learned, we can learn best practices, we can share our experiences. So that's it from an external side. Obviously, on the internal side, we're engaging with every line of business and every stakeholder within a company that is impacted by our transmission line ratings. As I described the project and determining how much power we can flow through our lines, that's half the equation, but the other half is really understanding all of the downstream ramifications, all of the risk that we're introducing to the system. By having a fluctuating rating, this changes what folks are used to seeing. In today's system, you have the same rating essentially 24/7, 365. It gives you a nice solid baseline rating that you can design, plan, and build around. You can build your protection schemes around that. And so now with the advent of dynamic line ratings, we really need to be careful about how we upend the way that we do business internally, how our protection team looks at this, how our operations team looks at this, how we even plan and design construction projects around low seasons of demand. So it's a really complex beast, a really complex animal, but luckily we have a lot of great internal and external relationships.
Okay, what about you, Farzad, about the partners you need to engage and how you do that, bring them into your work? It sounds like you might actually, I'm curious how that actually, what that looks like for someone who's going to be enrolling their EV in this process.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have different type of the partnership with different type of the players on this area. On one side, we as C teams, we meet with CEC and other IOUs by weekly basis, discuss about EPIC projects and also progress that we have on the projects. And also our EPIC team has created advisory panel from the different community-based organizations. We meet almost every 2 months from the representative from those panels, and we discuss about the projects, progress, selections that we have done throughout the projects with those panelists.
Are the community-based organizations folks who represent the communities that you are implementing this in? Is that what they're for?
Yes, all the way from Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and also other areas that they have their representative. What benefits provides to us is we started introducing the projects to them, and they came back with a lot of suggestions and some needs that they have in the communities. And it helped the project technically to understand that how in reality these projects can provide the benefits at the end to the communities and the customers within our service territory. That is one item. And at the other side, we externally started to communicate, engage with the different players on this specific project, which included EV auto manufacturing on one side. We haven't started having meeting from them from late last year with different EV manufacturers, like I can mention Honda, Ford, GM, Toyota, Tesla, and a lot of them. We discussed about the EV's capabilities and what we can do with this type of the EVs. At the same time, we discussed maybe with more than 15 aggregator companies and technology providers to understand that what capabilities they have, what they have done in the US in the past, and what they have done in the Europe as a successful use cases.
In Europe?
In Europe,
Oh,
yeah. Because some of these technologies, may have done some pilot projects in the Europe. We were looking at what was the lesson learned conducting those projects in the Europe. At the end, the idea of all of this working and engagement with external companies was to understand from each other, let them to understand our needs, let us to understand how technology is going to work, and it can provide the benefits to the customers. At the other side, this project is looking at integrating large size energy resources to our grid to benefit the grid as well. So we started having conversations with local schools and also campuses that already have large DERs, BESS or other type of the DERs installed within campus, and they are willing to participate on this type of the projects to understand that how this energy resources can provide the benefit to the local grid to stabilize and bring the stability to the systems. So if I wanted to summarize, as external entities, we have these conversations going on with CEC, advisory panels, EV manufacturers, and technology providers.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks to get involved with all of these things. Okay, and then Franz, your project seems a little more, chunked, discrete, maybe, but maybe what's your answer to this question?
Yeah, so this project really starts with the customers. So that the customers in this area have a real need. They want to connect and get electric service. And so, as a utility, we have to be mindful about how we do our upgrades and make sure we keep affordability in mind and how we free up capacity. So to me, that's really exciting about employing this technology, is that we can free up capacity at a much lower cost than doing things the status quo way. So it started with the customers. And so we've been working with them. Our customer outreach folks have been engaging with them routinely to ensure that they still want to connect, and that they're aware of our schedule with the project. And so, this battery project is unique as well, where we've done battery projects like Elkhorn where it's transmission connected, or we've done battery projects where it's next to a substation. So, it's pretty straightforward when you already have lots of land to site the battery. So we've had to bring in different groups and work with the community to expand the small easement where these batteries are going, and then work with the county to get the necessary permits for not only the batteries, but we do have to do some supporting equipment work in that area. So it's been a close interaction with the county, and battery safety is at the focus of this project as well. So we want to make sure we have the right design and systems in place to ensure that the battery is well monitored and controlled. And so we've worked closely with CAL FIRE and the volunteer fire department in the area where the battery is going, so that we have the design is approved and that we have the right emergency response if something were to happen. So we've been closely working with them. And then we've also been working with our partners in industry. So we've worked with other members in IEEE to discuss battery safety and NFPA 855 standard, which we're applying to this project. And even just the controls approach, we've worked with other partners. So Quanta Technology is one. We've worked with them to help us build our test lab. And we also work closely with Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. They designed the hardware platform that the controls are going to reside in. So it's spans a lot of different groups within PG&E, which sometimes makes it a challenge, because this is a new project. We have to bring in both the substation side of the house, power gen, and distribution, and we have different standards, and we have to figure out how to make it fit with this new battery site. But it's exciting. We look forward to making it operational.
Yeah. Franz, let's stay with you. What would it take to scale your innovation?
Yeah, so that's been a focus for this project. Is we don't want to just put these assets out there and have a custom engineering solution for everyone. We're really trying to focus on, okay, what decisions can we make now to standardize this type of solution? Who's going to own and maintain this type of solution, so that we can rapidly scale it up and deploy it elsewhere in the system?
Because you have several lines that look like this one.
Yeah, we see a lot of opportunity for non-wires alternatives like battery storage on our lines to free up additional capacity. So if we can design this site and incorporate some standards that we can apply and speed up scalability of this type of technology, that's one thing we're keeping in mind. So we're hoping we can apply those design principles and allow us to scale more quickly.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, and then and then in terms of, well, let's go to you, Aaron. Yeah, what would it take to scale your innovation?
Yeah, there's a couple, I guess, issues that when it comes to scalability. I think the first thing is, to be clear, our project is a demonstration project. So we are evaluating technologies that are out there. That's not to say there's only 4. There's 30 or 40 vendors in this dynamic plan rating space. Our partnership with EPRI also gives us access to other utilities demonstration projects as well too. So I think the first criteria and the issue of scalability is first finding a successful candidate. As I mentioned before,
Because you're using 4 different technologies
we're
to
testing
see
out
which
4, yes,
one
and we're
might work
seeing
best.
how they perform. Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
okay.
So they all have unique ways about determining what a line rating is and how to monitor our assets. And so this is a 2-year trial period where we can evaluate and see how they perform against what the control says. So if it says that you should be able to pump this much power, is it actually true, or are you overrepresenting what you said you'd be able to do? So I think the number one thing is finding a candidate that is successful, whether it's one of the 4 that we're testing or one of the dozens of others that are also being looked at through our partnership with EPRI, who is then working with other utilities. As for scalability, there's another challenge with this, is that finding the right size solution. So as I showed on the screen earlier, there's sensors that we can put online that informs the system of what the real-time conditions are of the grid. But we certainly are not planning on putting a sensor at every single span and every single tower and every single piece of our territory. I think a big part of it is finding the right size solution, determining how many sensors we should be putting out, what things we need to take into consideration, tree line corridors, heat islands in cities, elevation changes going through the Sierras, things of that sort. And so in working with these different vendors and working with EPRI, trying to determine what is the right size. Do you go every 5 miles? Do you go at every line angle change? Do you go at every 1,000 feet elevation change? And it's finding what the optimal solution is, because nothing comes for free. Every sensor we put up, we have to maintain, we have to install, we have to ensure that it's working correctly. And so we can't just slap sensors everywhere. I think the other barrier for scalability is the step that comes past this demonstration, which is the I'm going to butcher the word, operationalization, utilizing in real time this data. So this is a demonstration project. We're getting data, and I've tripped over that word a lot, so I'm not going to try to gloss over it.
It feels meaningless to me at the word, so let's not even use it.
Let's move on. But using that data in real time, cracking what the ratings are is one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is how do you use this in real time. There's a lot of communication and cybersecurity protocols, critical infrastructure requirements that are in place. You can't just develop a rating, push into the grid, and operate on that rating. You have to set up all the correct communication protocols, communications with the California ISO who manages the grid. There's a lot of steps for scalability. So this is step 1 for demonstration. Let us find a successful player in the space. At the same time, we'll work on our systems. We'll figure out what is the right way to make this happen. We're making incremental steps to go in that direction anyways, but that's, I would say, is one of the barriers for scalability.
Okay. All right. And what about you, Farzad?
Yeah. One item for the cider project is unique is that most of the projects usually we do has a specific location. This project doesn't have any specific location. The idea is to conduct this project through our production environment, utilizing EVs across our service territory.
So this is really throughout your whole service territory?
Entire whole service territory.
Wow.
But the question is that how we can maximize the usage of these EVs and what will be the best location. So in order to bring the more participation from the EV owners and customers to conduct on this type of the projects, we are getting the help and we onboard the aggregator, third-party aggregators. Throughout the RFP, we invited 15 aggregators to participate. We may down select half of them, around 6 to 8 of them, to integrate to our distribution energy resource management system. So aggregators and how utility companies are going to establish the reliable communications with them is one of the major barriers for this project. And also the way that this aggregation companies will act, plan, communicate with the customers and onboard them to their platform, and also find the kind of innovative way to provide the incentives at the end to provide a benefit to the end users are some of the challenges that we have throughout this project. We as a SE, we try to provide opportunity, support some of the engineering costs, integrations, and all of those to make sure we can maximize the aggregator companies' participation, and also work with them closely to bring and onboard more EVs throughout our service territory to this project. But at the end, we have to work with real issues. We need to know that which section of grids we are going to face with some challenges on the upcoming days, and how a group of the EVs can participate on this type of the events to provide the solution to the needs that we have. So if I wanted to summarize, so we as SCE, we need to maximize the number of the aggregation companies that we are planning to work throughout this project, and also work closely with them to onboard the maximum number of the EVs within our service territory, and make sure at the end this project and technology demonstration can benefit the EV owners. That could be the saving the energy bills for the EV owners.
Okay. Just briefly, I want to ask you all to think of 1 to 2 lessons you have learned thus far on working on these innovations that might be useful for other people here who are perhaps working on projects of their own. And then let's open it up to audience Q&A. So what are those? Let's go down the line. First, I'll start with you over here.
So
1 to 2 lessons.
Throughout this project, we noticed some more gaps. So one of the gaps that is interoperability and communications between different type of the EV manufacturings and also aggregation systems, and between aggregation systems to the distribution. One lesson learned is that to start from the base level of the communication to understand that how this interoperability can be established. Second was that in addition of distribution companies, we need to look at the optimization behind the meter. That means, we need to look at how we can optimize the load and provide the load flexibility at the customer's location, and which technologies are available. These are the 2 things that we noticed, that in addition of the communications and the energy resources, providing the optimized solution at the edge of the distribution systems are some of the lessons learned that we got from this project.
Thank you. What about you, Aaron?
Yeah, I'd say one of the biggest lessons learned is really just to benchmark with other utilities. I think oftentimes we kind of get siloed in our own work and we focus on what's ahead of us here. But really, this project has opened up my eyes to the world of electricity throughout the entire country and the world. I mean, we speak with other people that aren't just here in the US grid, and really making these inroads, building these relationships, getting these lessons learned. I mean, just as a simple example, again, with our relationship with EPRI, we would never be able to test 30 different vendors in the space. We'd never be able to find that. It's just not practical. But by leveraging our relationship with other utilities, we can learn from what they have experienced. We're working with other vendors in the space. So we get 4 vendors ourselves, they get 4, they get 4, they get 4. And now we have a good snapshot of how do these different technologies operate, and what are your lessons learned? What are things that you should be looking out for? What are the different pitfalls? And so really we're not in this alone. This is a group effort. This is something that the entire nation and world would benefit from. I mean, it's just a more efficient grid utilization. So.
All right, thanks. And what about you, Franz?
One of the key lessons learned from this project, and even just in our industry right now, is load forecasting is much more complex and challenging than it used to be. It used to be pretty much plan on 2% growth each year because of all the efficiency programs that the state has done, which has done a great job. Now we're seeing the transition to electrification, and EVs, and more customers want to connect with new loads to the grid, so that makes it a challenge. So in this particular circuit, we started with a certain forecast, and then we had more customers want to connect, and so we had to throw that old forecast out. And now we're talking, we started out with initially 2 batteries. Now we're sizing the site to allow up to 4 batteries, and we can kind of start with 3, and we have room for a 4th if we need to drop it in for a little bit more support. So this is just on a distribution circuit, but you talk about on the transmission system too, and load forecasting with big data centers connecting. There's a lot of uncertainty sometimes. So that's a key lesson learned for us on this project in our little corner. And then the other thing that we've learned is reactive power from inverters is often overlooked, and it can provide a benefit to distribution if you have a good control system that can take advantage of it to free up even more capacity. So that's been a key learning for the project that we've observed through our modeling and simulations.
We would love to hear from you all. What questions do you have? And please just say what your name is and where you're coming from today, like who you represent, not your home. So interesting. Yes, whoever gets the mic first, you're maybe over here. All right.
Hi, Kurt from the Climate Center. This morning, there was a reference to the Kavala study issued in August of 2025 with Grid Lab that said if you optimize on the distribution grid, like statewide, you might get $13.7 billion in avoided utility investments in distribution infrastructure based on load balancing and sort of essentially succeeding at some level on what it is you're working on. I'm just curious, have you seen that study? Do you have any comments about it? Do you think it's, if we're actually successful at this, that we can get anywhere close to that?
Barza, do you feel like you, or do you want to go, Franz? Looks like you're about to.
Yeah, I think it applies mostly to my project with non-wires alternatives. So we see a lot of opportunity. I'll have to look at that study. It sounds like it's pretty recent, so I'll have to look at some of the assumptions that they're making on the cost. But from a high level, we do see more opportunities for using non-wires alternatives and DERs to improve the utilization of our existing assets. So I think there's a huge opportunity to have some cost avoidance through this approach, and that's why we're keeping the scalability in mind for this project.
Franz, for the numbers that you all have and are looking at for this line, what would be the actual savings if this works? Like rather than, upgrade, what the alternative upgrades would be?
Yeah, we'll know once the project is complete, but it's on the order of several millions of dollars.
Did anyone else want to answer that question? No, okay. All right, next question over here.
Yes, hi, my name is Jennifer Bach. I'm with the California Community Choice Association, and we represent 24 of the CCAs in California, serving roughly half of the electric customers in the state. Many, if not all of them, have some sort of program that involves distributed resources, and several are actually deploying their own DERMS platforms. But they don't have any information on what's going on the distribution grid. So they're going to be deploying those and operating them in a manner that's going to be reducing system capacity, resource adequacy. And my question is, have you been thinking about how do you actually leverage these non-IOU DERs that are enrolled in either CCA or another LIC or aggregator and ensure that as you're trying to optimize the capacity on the grid, that these other DERs are being managed without visibility on the grid, maybe counteracting what you're trying to do at the distribution level. And my suggestion is CCAs, especially ones that are going with these DERMS programs, can be an asset that you can tap into in order to better leverage and optimize your distribution grid. And have you been thinking about that as you talk about scalability and operationalization of these programs? This is something that's sort of a missing component, but it's vital because of the number of customers that are enrolled in these programs. You may even have a single customer that has an asset that's enrolled in an IOU program, one that's enrolled in a CCA program, and one that's enrolled in a third-party aggregator program. And they may not be operating in concert.
So I can take a part of this question from technical perspective, not from the other perspective, that for CIDR project, which is technology demonstration, we are considering at minimum two type of the DERs. First is large amount of the EVs in our service territory, and second is the larger size of the DERs, as you mentioned. And one of the way that we would approach this type of the DERs is integrating them to our DERMS system through dedicated gateway. That means, we are open to discuss about the size, location, of the DERs that you mentioned, and also work with that community to understand that how we can integrate that large type of the DERs to our back office distribution energy resource management system through the established communication. Then we can discuss that on that, what we can do, what we cannot do at that area, because it depends what type of the constraints or limits that grid may have on that specific area, and how that DER can contribute to that type of the events. It may require adding some local controllers and identify the control philosophy for that, who and when can dispatch the control of that, and should we consider bidirectional capability or not. There are some level of the discussion that needs to be done, but at least inside our project, we have considered technology demonstration in smaller case that later can scale up to the larger amounts as you mentioned.
Thank you. What other questions we have? Someone's over here.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Roman Partia Lopez with the Green Lining Institute. And I really want to kind of dive into kind of the title of this breakout, right? And the affordability piece, right? I mean, Aaron, you mentioned that what you all are undertaking are demonstration projects, right? And so I'm really curious from y'all's perspective of like that affordability lens, right? Is if you were to scale up each of your demonstration projects, right? Like what that impact will be. Franz, you mentioned like the potential savings of billions of dollars, but what is the initial impact on ratepayers if we were to proceed with the demonstration projects you all have? Will we see an initial increase in rates to then eventually see the savings? Or is that still stuff that you all are kind of working through? Because I'm like, I think that's the lens that I'm really trying to look at any of the projects that we are discussing here in this room and just overall, right? On what that overall impact is on the ratepayer. How are we making sure that we are continuing to address the affordability issue? And is what y'all are working on really getting to that? Or are we kind of still, it's a TBD?
Who wants to talk about that? Aaron, do you want to talk about? I mean, you heard a bit about cost from you, Franz.
Yeah, I can kind of give my piece and then other folks can.
Yeah,
so that's a great question. I mean, that is the core of what this breakout session is about affordability. Up to this point, I focused on efficiency and efficiently utilizing the grid. I'm not a marketing person. I can't speak specifically on the financial impacts of this sort of thing. But what I can comment on is that when we deploy this technology, and if we get to that point, there are savings where PG&E typically today will pay congestion costs or will curtail different generation facilities and will therefore not maybe accept all of the green energy that could be coming back into the grid. I know for a couple of things, there is different ways that our rates are put together. One of them is the cost of what it takes to produce electricity and those transmission rates. There are studies that we have internal that show where our congestion rates occur to the greatest effect, can be tens of millions of dollars. And by doing that, we can, by implementing this project, we can then reduce or mitigate the amount of curtailment or congestion that's necessary. I think another aspect of this project is that, I think Franz had mentioned this earlier with his non-wire solution, is that by utilizing technologies such as non-wire, such as battery storage, such as dynamic line rating, the idea is that we can defer or prioritize or even eliminate certain costly investment projects. So think about a full-scale greenfield line deployment that requires PG&E to acquire tremendous amounts of land, build structures, build wires, or reconductoring projects where we say this line that exists today does not have enough capacity. What is our solution? At present, or maybe traditional thinking would say we need to tear down all of those lines and replace with higher capacity lines. What things like dynamic line ratings do is it helps as a bridging solution to say, if we just need this slight 10 to 20% capacity, we can grab this during these times, and it can help us understand where are our true bottlenecks in the system and how we can reduce the cost and by extension, reducing costs for our ratepayers.
Your project, from what you're seeing, would this require, like in terms of the timeline of those savings, would that be that we would see that initially if this project went well and you were able to scale it, or does it require a larger upfront investment for these little, whatever devices you guys end up choosing?
I think luckily it does require a large upfront investment. Without getting into all the particulars, we are utilizing other existing projects that are happening within PG&E. The largest one being something called FERC Order 881. That's a national order that's being applied to all different utilities across the country. What it's requiring us to do is to not use those static ratings, but to use ambient adjusted temperature ratings, meaning I'm going to look at the real-time temperature. What our project is doing is it's also utilizing real-time wind speed. So to answer your question, yes, there is significant investment requirements up front, but PG&E is already implementing. So is Southern Cal Edison, who we interface with quite frequently. All these different utilities across the country are already putting in the resources necessary to handle a fluctuating rating system. And so by doing that, we're kind of double dipping here. We're getting that ambient adjusted rating system set up, and we're also looking at what can we do next as the next step of the process. I think the other idea behind this dynamic line rating is that I completely lost my train of thought here. But I think when we do reduce these congestion issues, like it's going to make its way down to the customer, and we are putting the money up front. We are leveraging what's already there. Oh, and the final idea is that it's not just us acting alone to determine what is the optimal amount of deployment, how much resources we should be putting inside of this. There is discussions and legislation occurring at a higher level that is saying you need to look at your system and determine how many millions of dollars you are spending on congestion fees. And by doing that, it'll help you, again, right size your solution and right size your thing. So we're not just planning on throwing away money at a solution that may not truly exist. It's determining, where can we truly appreciate these gains in the system.
Just to clarify, like if you were going to implement your solution in a larger scale, it would be an upfront investment, but would it ultimately save more than like if you were going to rewire or whatever?
Yeah, and that is absolutely part of the equation. It would save money, and that's why we wouldn't just deploy it everywhere. It's kind of interesting to see through looking at this project
compared to the status quo. You mean
exactly compared to the status quo.
So it would be something that people would feel some rate relief, perhaps, if this.
Yeah, and again, I can't get into all the particulars there. I'm just an engineer here.
Yeah,
but there would be rate relief in that sense because the cost of transmitting electricity throughout the state would go down. Is the idea. Okay. So that is part of what the rate case is. There's other aspects too, but again, not my wheelhouse, not my area of expertise. But it is certainly. We're being cost conscious. That's part of what the program is looking at. We're trying to make sure that we're not just throwing away dollars. We're also looking at where our dollars will be best maximized. And so that really is cost, and affordability is a main driver for what this project and program is doing.
Berza, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, for our projects, one of the questions from the beginning was that how this technology can provide the benefits for the grid as well as the customers. On the customer side, as far as the benefit would be that one of the large costs related to this topic is specifically for EV is EV charging infrastructure at home. Some of the customers, they may need to replace the panel. Some of them, they may need to install new charging infrastructure at the home. So one of the items that we have been working with aggregators to understand that how aggregators can provide that option to provide full or a portion of the cost of charging infrastructure installations at the customer's home level. And also there are some programs at SCE that if some of the customers want this type of the programs, SCE could provide some infrastructure replacement costing as well. And also when this technology get in operation phase, the idea would be that EV owners as customers participated throughout this program and being flexible on charging in the EVs or pushing back the EV charging time instead of daytime to off-peak time of the network will get incentives that at the end will help them to save the energy billing costs. So 3 sections would be the infrastructure, cost support, replacement support, and also energy bill support are 3 metrics that we have considered at this project.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if your concern was more on the EPIC program cost to ratepayers or not, but I'm not an EPIC program manager, but just the program, our intent is to spend the money in the program wisely. We know it's a ratepayer funded program, so it's low cost as far as impact to customer bills, but if the technology proves out to be successful and we can scale it up, then on the back end you make up orders of magnitude more in potential savings, right? So we're really grateful to have the EPIC program to allow us to fast track these technologies and evaluate them. And the intent of the program, I've seen the language of fail fast. If it doesn't work out, then you scrap that project and move on, and it's a low cost of trying something new. But all the approaches that have been mentioned on this panel here are really exciting and have been encouraging in their demonstration so far. So I'll leave it there.
All right, let's take one final question. Yes. Oh, wait, actually, sorry, we're gonna go over here because we've already got a question for you. So let's hear your question.
Thank you. Jorge Silva from TS Conductor. So looking at what France and Aaron was actually telling, it seems that the problem that they're trying to solve is to the existing constraints. That is actually a particular demand. But what about the demand of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down? How you guys are trying to tackle that optimization looking forward? Because yes, actually BESS, as well as actually what you're telling, can actually help a lot on today's problem, but maybe not tomorrow, not the next 5 years.
I can comment on that. So that's part of the scalability question, but even more broadly than that, I think it highlights the need for our integrated grid planning platform that we're using. So we're looking at the longer time horizon, and through different Senate bills as well, we're looking at climate effects. So we have a climate resiliency team that's looking at how our lines and loading is going to be affected in the future. So we are looking at various time horizons and trying to plan things out farther ahead. But we have to start with the more near term, more concrete load forecasting that's going to materialize, and while also keeping in mind the long-term load growth. So our integrated grid planning platform is helping to do that and keep affordability in mind, and bundle different types of needs on the grid, not just capacity, but other needs that the grid needs upgrades for as well, so that we can leverage efficiencies by doing multiple types of work in a location that's addressing multiple needs.
All right, to keep to time, do you want to? No, we're gonna end it here. I'm so sorry. We're just gonna try to keep it to time. But you two connect afterwards so you can discuss. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the CEC for hosting everyone today. And then thanks to our amazing panel, Aaron, Franz, and Farzad. Thank you so much. Let's hear for these panelists. All right. Bye-bye.